Okay, hello there. Let's jump straight in, shall we? Today we're going to be looking at creating an outline from the synopsis we created last week in the first video of this series. I wanted you to create a story about a theme and a setting of your choice, all within 300 or so words, but no more of 500, and it should have included the elements of a hook, climax, stakes that will push the story forward, events which will happen between the hook and the climax, and set a tone and a mood for your scenario. This didn't have to be fancy, it's just had to tell yourself the story. Within that I showed you my 4 hours to Reno synopsis, and we rounded out with my idea for a new scenario which I was going to call Grave Robbers. This was set about a bank and using the themes of zombies and a heist. And with that, here is my homework. This is the synopsis for Grave Robbers. A PI, Wilburn Knowles, has been asked to help an old friend who is a manager at Willard and Cole's bank, fearing that there are next series of heists that have hit the area. The police are overstretched, ordered to protect the larger banks, and their unions are threatening to strike for unpaid overtime, making them unlikely to respond quickly if they are needed. Owing Knowles a favour, the investigators will have to go undercover and work a few days in the bank to pay off their debit to the PI. Dealing with the day-to-day of the difficult customers, staff politics, and Knowles' narcolepsy, all the while trying to blend in the best they can and figure out if there is an inside man feeding information to the robbers. The bank robber, Arthur Wolseley, has found an unusual notepad in the pocket of a dead man during a routine job as a mortician. From it, he has learned to animate the dead. Poor and stuck in a miserable profession, Arthur has come up with a creative way to make some extra money by using his clients as bank robbers. Wolseley is an expert in makeup and has disguised the zombies and given them simple instructions to pass as a living, sending them into banks to make demands. The heist will escalate into a horror show as the staff and customers panic, leaving the investigators to figure out what is going on and placate or thwart the robbers. In time, the police will blunder into the scene and cause Wolseley to release more zombies from his hearse as a distraction and take off, climaxing in the bloodbath at the bank as the police are taken down, or a car chase as Knowles goes after the hearse. So the first thing we need to do when looking at taking this synopsis and branching it out into an outline, which will then go on to put some meat on the bones and create the final thing, is we need to establish NPCs. We have 3 in the initial synopsis. We have Wilburn Knowles, the PI, we have the bank manager, and we also have Arthur Wolseley. We're going to be looking at them first. So we break characters down into description, traits, and motives. The descriptions of the NPCs are a storytelling tool. They can portray a lot of things that can be picked up on by the players. For example, Wolseley could have very soft hands and have a faint smell around him, be dressed in a somber funeral suit and give off the vibes of a funeral director. Being not aware that he has the smell of formaldehyde around him because he's so used to it. As long as your characters aren't overly cartoonish and stereotyped, you've got a lot of scope here to put a lot of information in front of the player without any prompts or knocking them over the head with obvious clues. Some players might not pick up on them, but the ones that do will feel rewarded for it. Make sure you consider this when you actually assemble your NPCs. When it comes to traits in NPCs, it's all about emotion. You want to emote a strong feeling in the players as they interact with them. It can be hate, it can be love, it can be annoyance, it can be fun, it can be anything as long as it's not, I don't care about this person at all. They're just a piece of cardboard, and if they die or they're suffering or in trouble, then it's no skin off my nose. That is the worst. Traits fills this role as you start to fill in who they are and what they are. small tics like picking their teeth, little sort of hiccups or stutters, all these things, even their sort of attitude towards others, all add to the overall effect of how much people will connect. Players must have good motivations for any action they take. So do NPCs. They can't act stupid. They can't act like their IQ is 20. It will break the immersion, and the players will call shenanigans on it as they discover what they've been up to, and they sort of wrinkle their face and go, "Well, that makes no sense." The players have to make assumptions and calls off of these things, and when they see something happen that is completely nonsensical, they feel cheated because they were under the impression that everyone was everyone was being logical, much like themselves. So the next thing we need to look at after NPCs is the background. This is where we're going to be making bullet points for the background story for the antagonist, the snowball effect of small incidents which led him to where he is now, and what his overall story is going to play out like. What is his main sort of goals for this scenario? This is the story which the PCs will hopefully discover or look into in some fashion, and it provides them with a sort of a way to be more interactive with the story, discovering this sort of plot line. For something like The Haunting, for example, that would be Mr. Corbett's story of him wanting to evolve into something else using the Church of Contemplation and that sort of thing. So this is what this is, and you need to establish this before you do anything else. Alright, so we're now up to the events, or the main meat of what we're going to be doing for our outline. We're going to pull from the synopsis several elements that's going to create problems for our PCs between the initial start and the climax or potential climax. I would suggest making a flowchart of how your scenes interact, whether they need to go to all of them or whether they need to actually just follow the sort of breadcrumbs from one to the other. There's a few ways of doing this, and it depends on how you're structuring your scenario, to be honest. For example, my scenario is pretty much one location, and these are events which are going to happen on a trigger. When one event is finished, the next one will begin, or if the PCs are too slow to sort one out, the next one will begin early and compound the problem, and it's going to be a meat grinder of situations which are going to escalate and escalate and escalate inside the actual bank itself, leading to two possible sort of climaxes. So we're going to have a split there right at the end of what they're going to do. They can either stay and try and sort out the actual mess they've got themselves into, or they can actually hyper focus on the real problem, which is Woosley, and chase him and take him down. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the climax, which I want two climaxes, which is possible. One is where the police show up and escalating everything beyond reasonable doubt into a sort of bloodbath, or we can have the PCs leave the bloodbath behind and focus on chasing the hearse which Woosley will leave in, leading to a car chase and possibly finding him back at his funeral home and confronting him there, ultimately discovering his story. So that's what we need to do. So we have in the events or scenes, you need to look at each one on a level of who's in the scenes and why. Let's just start with the first one, behind the bank, where they're going to meet. So Knowles and Strikes, the bank manager, are going to meet behind the bank. These scenes are here to go over the plan of what the PCs will be doing. making sure they understand exactly what their goals are. The worst thing you can do is have a player not understand his purpose and basically just shrug their shoulders and goes, I don't know what's going on. That means your scenario has failed utterly. You need them to have straightforward goals. Main objectives of the scene. This is why this scene is here. If you cannot fill in this box for a certain scene, remove the scene because it doesn't serve a purpose. If your scene doesn't serve a purpose and it's just there as filler, this will tell you you're pretty much on the wrong path. So for the opening scene behind the bank, exposition dump, for the players to make sure they know what they're doing. This is the quest giver scene, essentially. What's driving it forward is the hook. So the hook is basically Knowles has a favour to cash in, and he's cashing in. That's why the PCs are here. They are taking orders from him to do this thing to pay off this debt. That's driving the actual scene forward. This scene is going to be used to foreshadow Knowles' narcolepsy. So an obstacle they need to overcome straight away is they have an moment where Knowles falls asleep while explaining and has to be woken up. They can discover his pills, and they can discover the fact he's going to be unreliable throughout this. They are on their own, which raises the stakes and moves the plot forward some more. So moving on from there, we expand that from the back of the bank to the players going into the bank with their PCs and scoping out the actual staff themselves. They're going to be, this is your investigation event. It's going to be small. It's not the focus of the actual scenario itself. It is actually a bit of a red herring. There's no real undercover insider or undercover agent inside for the bank heist. This is just Strike being paranoid. That can also be foreshadowed in the first scene that he is just paranoid, and can be compounded again by introducing the staff in the bank and making sure they understand he's just paranoid. With that, we move on to the next scene, which basically starts the proper escalation or inciting incident. Is the customers of the bank come in, and Wosley's involved. He's one of the first people into the bank. He is there to scope it out, and this brings in suspicion, and he's there to sort of observe as everything starts to unravel. So you've got a little bit of escalation and objectives. This is to create distraction and break away from what the players should be doing, which is looking out for Wosley, who's standing in front of them in plain sight, and they're constantly looking out the windows, looking for this supposed hearse, which is being reported, which is parked around the corner. Knowles is in his car. He's asleep with narcolepsy. And then we move on to the second wave of customers coming to the bank, which includes the zombies, the bank robbers, compounding the issue, and they're going to sow confusion and panic throughout the staff and the other customers and the PCs themselves, escalating it and blowing it up. The players will almost certainly call the police. This is part of the whole point of this scenario. You're playing on the whole meta of they're going to be calling the police. Okay, let's build that into the scenario. And the police are going to be absolutely terrible and cause absolute destruction. They're going to shoot at everyone that moves. They're going to be eaten by zombies. They're going to be attacked by the customers. They're just going to create an absolute mess and escalate everything further instead of de-escalating it and taking control of the situation. They're overworked, they're tired, they're not thinking straight, and then they've got zombies in their face. That is going to be the end of the scenario if they stay there and try to survive that carnage, or they can be wise. They can pick up on the tells that Wosley, one of the customers, is acting differently, and he leaves, and he is going to then be chased by Knowles and the party in a car chase in the hearse. If they chase the hearse all the way back to his funeral home, which you'll run to, they have a chance to discover exactly who Wosley is, and his backstory, his tragic backstory, which might give them a little bit more compassion for him, and they can decide what to do with him from there. But yep, that's pretty much it. So for next week, I would like you to take your synopsis and do exactly this: extrapolate it and expand it into a background, some information about the main NPCs and their motivations, the opening hook leading into the opening scene, and the scenes leading up to the possible finale or climax. This should be reasonably easy to do, and this is the backbone of your actual scenario itself. You could probably run the scenario as is, like this, if you are good at improv and your players are quite interactive and quite RP heavy. They will create places where the story can go from this bare bones. So the next week, after we've done this, we'll be looking at pulling the scenes together with descriptions, looking at how to make maps and conveying information through maps, and fleshing out the world that we're going to set this scenario in, and looking at some of the elements we want to focus on and pull to the player's attention through map design and things like that. Okay, so thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again next time.